prime target will be a woman named Le Cabra. She's Santa Blanca's main negotiator. We take her down, and the deal with the Peruvians goes with her.
Copy that. We'll be in touch.
It may shock you to learn that this is the 6-year-old game Ghost Recon Wildlands. Using some mods to reimagine the experiences, well, many players might have wanted it to be. Back in 2017, this game launched and reinvented the Ghost Recon franchise in a massive open world. They created one of gaming's largest and most immersive open world shooters that felt somewhat boundless in its scope. Certainly a bit of a departure from the more hardcore experience of past titles, but nonetheless was a memorable experience for pushing forward such an ambitious project. But Ubisoft also missed out on some big gaming trends at the time, like battle royale modes, large-scale PvE co-op, and of course, a first-person mode. Now, most people probably think of Ghost Recon as a third-person shooter franchise, but the original Ghost Recon game from 2001 was actually a first-person shooter. It was very rudimentary compared to modern FPS games. Heck, it didn't even render weapon models, but you can still see that the DNA of the franchise is there. 2004's Ghost Recon 2 is when the franchise went third person, and it's basically been that way ever since. But modders have been able to change that, finally. Early last year, a mod was released on Nexus that converted Wildlands to a first-person experience, and it's surprising how well the game actually functions when played from a perspective it was basically never intended to support. Now, vanilla Wildlands does sort of have an FPS mode, but it's basically just a static, aimed view of your weapon model to facilitate stuff like precise long-range shooting. The other 90% of the experience is played from third person. There isn't even really an animation for switching into the default first-person view, so the fact that this FPS mod works at all while looking like a baked-in feature says a lot about how much work probably went into it. Ubisoft got within a hair's distance from a true FPS mode, and they just didn't really cross that finish line. And that could be frustrating if you really like the first-person perspective, or games like Fallout, Stalker, PUBG, Grand Theft Auto 5, and DICE's Battlefront games that have offered both perspectives pretty successfully. And even though this mod does have some limitations and shortcomings, playing Wildlands from a first-person perspective just adds a whole bunch of immersion that the original experience never had. The narrower field of view lets you focus more on the obstacles and enemies that you encounter. There's less distractions, the high-quality models, textures, and general assets that Ubisoft packed into the game are presented front and center, and it's a real testament to the actual visuals that Ubisoft achieved with this game. And I'm not using any fancy reshade tools like screen space ray tracing or color correction for this footage. It's just how good the game actually looks, even though it's 6 years old at this point. The combat in first person is also way more engaging. The disconnect that you tend to feel while controlling your character in the third person perspective can be a bit hard to shake off. And in the vanilla experience, it makes you feel like an omnipresent being rather than somebody with their actual boots on the ground. Sneaking up to an enemy base, silently sniping the tower guards and infiltrating the area is just undeniably much more immersive when you're not looking over the walls or around corners with some sort of magical floating camera. And recording footage for this video felt like rediscovering an entirely new game buried under the already solid experience Wildland offers. It's also possible to use the FPS mod in online co-op, so you and your friends can all have the exact same first-person experience together. I haven't heard or seen of anyone actually getting banned by Ubisoft for playing Wildlands with mods, but they could decide, say tomorrow, that they don't like it and retroactively ban everyone, so just keep that in mind if it's something you're thinking about. Now, aside from the questionable online play, it's still not a flawless experience. It's very clear that Ubisoft never intended the game to be played this way. The most obvious example is just the enemy AI. In most first-person games, enemies are designed to detect you based on line of sight for the most part. Obviously, some of the back-end stuff is a bit more complex than that, but the end result is generally, well, if they can't see you, then they're not going to react to you. But in third-person games like Wildlands, the AI has more of a bubble vision that lets them detect you if you just get too close. The idea is that since the player can see around walls, the enemies kind of need the same ability to feel like they're properly reacting to your presence, which totally makes sense in third person. But in first person, it just feels like the enemies are still playing in third person and you're kind of stuck with the tunnel vision. And if you ramp up the difficulty of the game, things get considerably more extreme. Enemies spot you faster, do more damage, have better aim, etc. Now, if this came combined with a mod that replaced or tweaked the enemy AI to be more line of sight based, then I think the FPS mod would feel much more intentional, but that's a pretty tough recode, I would imagine. And that's kind of the big issue. Wildlands seems very locked down when it comes to modding. Just running the FPS mod requires circumventing the game's anti-cheat. Other mods require using Cheat Engine, which is a pretty robust tool, but also widely banned by many developers. I think it's kind of implied within the name why that would be the case. So really the only gameplay mods available for Wildlands are the first person mod and the one that removes the cartoony detection and bullet hit sounds. I've been using that mod as well, and generally I think it adds to the experience. But considering what mods have done for other games that really support the modding scene, Wildlands seems like it could be absolutely ripe for modding if it didn't come with so many hoops to jump through. The limits of the FPS mod also become more obvious as you play. There's no transition animation for aiming with your weapon's iron sights or optics, so it can be a bit jarring. Driving is incredibly challenging since your field of view is so narrow and easily blocked by the body of the car. Despite some of those scenes though, Wildlands still plays great in first person. Like I said, I had a ton of fun actually recording this gameplay for the video, and it feels like a whole new take on the game. And it also exposed a really interesting aspect of Wildlands that I hadn't really thought much about until now. The Ghost Recon games historically have given you tons of control over your AI squad mates. You could give them very precise and specific orders to do stuff like breach doors, hold fire, select targets, move to cover, and other things. And these mechanics are all part of why older Ghost Recon games are in the third person. The focus is as much on controlling your squad as it is on your own actions, so you need to be able to see around corners and over walls to keep track of your AI companions. But Wildlands, and even the later sequel Breakpoint, generalized, condensed, and kind of simplified the commands to the point that controlling your squad mates isn't really a core part of the gameplay loop anymore. The game is designed so that they're there if you need the backup, but they don't really get in the way. For example, if you're stealthing past enemies undetected, well, they're also going to remain undetected, regardless of how visible they are to the enemies. The most manual control you tend to get with the AI squads is a sync shot, where you can mark enemies and your AI squads will one-hit kill them when you fire a shot or tell them to shoot. This all works really well from a first-person perspective, but it likely wouldn't have worked so well with the previous titles where more nuanced control was needed. Playing in first person lets you focus more on being the point man of the squad, rather than overseeing and commanding the squad's actions. And as much as I like games with more robust AI controls, it's actually a happy accident that Ubisoft went for a more casual system. Now, if anything, I think this video is a testament to how good Wildlands still looks. It's also incredibly well optimized. Back when it first launched, I was able to run this game on a triple monitor setup with a rock solid 60 FPS or better. So on today's hardware, it runs like an absolute dream. Wildlands was such an interesting title in that it reinvented the franchise in a way that kind of angered some of the legacy fans, pushed the game engine tech extremely far, impressively far, arguably further than any other open world shooter at the time, and it facilitated a very competent co-op play, but it also kind of managed to miss some big opportunities. Like its PvP modes didn't take advantage of the large open world environment that made the game, well, so special, and instead shrank the combat down to smaller, more traditional experiences. And this was all happening on the cusp of the royales and extraction shooters exploding, which Wildlands seemed primed to take advantage of, but it just never did. The game looked miles better than PUBG, but was never able to pivot and dip into that milsim MMO experience. Still, it's a game that deserves credit for doing some things extremely well, and this mod is a great way to try it out again, but from a new perspective. Did you guys play Wildlands, and if so, what did you think of it? Would you be interested in trying it again from a first-person perspective? Let me know in the comments, and next up, check out this video about a low-poly game that has basically replaced the Battlefield experience. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. This is Level Cap, signing off.